My heart was beating very loudly in the courtyard. Standing in the middle of the street, I looked at Auntie's face. The one who was wrapped in a white shroud was in the courtyard. I was surrounded by women everywhere. There were some people standing in groups here and there. She was crying loudly, muttering something. And I still don't believe it. I was pretending that my aunt was no longer in this world. When I went to school in the morning, he was completely fine when I left my house on my back. When I came out wearing my bag, I greeted them. I saw him standing in his doorway, and he was smiling and talking to her uncle. I waved at them from a distance, so they also responded by waving at me. I smiled and watched. But now what happened, Auntie? How can I die suddenly at this age? The time was 12 years, and my mind accepted this. I wasn't ready to do something like that. Auntie, you can die suddenly even by Asr time. The burials had also been done one by one. All the people and guests have left. Now go home. It was just me and my mother and uncle. Leaning against the wall, head between knees, they were sitting there. The call to prayer for Maghrib was about to be made. Then, my mother stepped forward and placed her hand on my uncle's shoulder. Holding her hand, she said, "Get up, Shakil. When will you just sit like this until you leave?" When will you leave? When her mother left, her uncle got up, and they went to the room. That night, no one in the house had even eaten. My mother and uncle gave me food. I hadn't even eaten the next morning. I had taken leave from school at my mother's request. Even today, people's egos continue to be felt at home. Many people from the village came to offer their condolences to Auntie. We were coming home, so Uncle also came to our side. This was the house where my mother and I lived. My grandfather built this house with his own hands. It was built by my father, Manzoor Ahmed, and Uncle Shakil Ahmed inherited his grandfather's property. If you divide it, then put a wall in the middle of the same house. The house was lifted and divided into two parts. My mother and I live in a part of the house. My father had been earning a living for many years. So I was living in Saudi Arabia. I remember I was probably 5 years old at the time when my father left for Saudi Arabia. And now I was 12 years old at the same time. Dad probably returned to Pakistan 2 or 3 times. Uncle and aunt live in the other part of the house. They had been married for a long time, but they were both deprived of the blessing of children. Even though I was a child at the time, I still came. During the day, I used to see that sometimes my aunt would be my uncle. With the coming of the city every day, some doctor or the other would visit. Sometimes I would go to a village woman's house. Sometimes with someone. That poor old man also went to the Darbar Dargah to pray. I remember very well that many times, Uncle lovingly took me to his side. They would call me and kiss my forehead and say, "Hey, how many times have good people told you to be quiet? Sit down. If God had to give you children, then He would give it. And then it's my Farouk, isn't it? He is our son too," replied Auntie. She smiles at me and says, "Yes, yes. So this is also our son, but my heart wants it. I wish I had a child in my arms too. Let me feed the child and pamper him with my aunt's care." There was so much pain and suffering in the tone at that time. I, who was a child at that time, was not interested in anything. I was unable to understand. I also prayed often. I used to pray, "Oh God, please give my uncle and aunt a small child at your house. I am not lacking anything, so I have everything. The world is yours, then by giving you a child. What is done? But I don't know what pleases God. It was impossible to have children in His house. But Auntie, Allah will love her death." A week had passed, Uncle. Now it's 3 o'clock. We used to eat our food at home. They went a week after their aunt's death. I learned this from my mother. Listen to what my aunt said about committing suicide. I looked at their faces in surprise. When I saw it, my mother said, "Auntie, you are very worried." The lack of children remained within them. She started eating and became a patient of depression. And under the pressure of that depression, they took their own life. That's how time flies. Time kept spinning. Time kept passing slowly, Auntie. 2 months had passed since his death, and now Uncle was not present for cooking at home. So Uncle was with us all the time. We used to eat at home, so that's why we mostly found him in our house. They would go anyway if they had any special work to do. They didn't have much agricultural land. They also gave away the land they had. I was watching my aunt's death unfold. Years have passed, but during this 1 year, I noticed a clear change in our home. It seemed to me that now Mom used to pay less attention to me. She used to sit and eat with me, and now she sits down and eats with my mother and uncle. She mostly sought comfort from her uncle. I was busy, and to be honest, I didn't feel like saying that. So I was only 13 or 14 years old, but village children who spend all day in the streets and neighborhoods roam around, growing up at a young age. They are sensible and look after their own home. This upcoming change is going to hit me hard. To tell the truth, sometimes I feel like an uncle. It's starting to look really bad now, Uncle. Even the clothes were being washed in our house. Mom was always around them. When you see him busy with his uncle's work, she used to wash her uncle's clothes. Sometimes she is ironing them. Sometimes she is saying, "I wish I could cook for my uncle." I sometimes say tea for your uncle. I've started making it. If you look at it, it's everyday routine tasks of life. But I didn't know why I have to do this to my mother's uncle. The kindness was now starting to turn poisonous, and then one night will be the limit. That night, I will be with you. I had already laid down to sleep in the room. When I open my eyes at night, I feel thirsty. I felt like getting out of bed. I put on slippers and headed outside, thinking the same thing. I was going to go to the kitchen and drink water, but as soon as I left my room and came into the courtyard, I felt as if I heard someone crying. Stopping there, I listened. I started trying to listen for a while. First, I heard someone crying. When I'm a little chicken, so I really need someone. The sound was deafening, and what was even more surprising was that it was as if this voice was coming from Amma's room. My mother is crying at the thought of this. My heart started to sink. "Why are you crying, Mom?" And that too in a hurry at this time of night. I was just about to head towards my mother's room when I heard another voice. This one was a man's voice. I looked at my own again. I stopped walking, but it felt like the ground shook in the courtyard at this moment. It was completely dark, no lights were burning, but in Mom's room, a Zero's light bulb was on. So he stood in the yard. I was in the dark while inside the room. The scene seemed clear to me as soon as I looked at the scene in front of me. I blinked and watched this scene over and over again. The mind and heart are not ready to admit it. My mother was sitting on the bed, crying. Uncle Shakil was sitting next to me. As soon as he sighed, his uncle held out his arm. He spread it on his mother's shoulder and took it in his arms. They said while holding each other, "Come on, just do it." "Why? How many times have you been crying and losing your temper?" "I have told you, but you don't understand what I mean. Why don't you listen with one ear every time? You listen and let it out the other ear. I don't understand why you're acting like this. What do you get by burning it, Uncle?" I don't know what you were saying to your mother, but I was surprised to see this scene and understood I was trying to figure out what was going on. I have retraced my steps from there. Turn to the room and go to your bed. I've fallen asleep." Now the question arises. It wasn't like he was asleep, and he was along with the peace and tranquility of my heart. It was ruined. I felt like my uncle was poisoned before. I used to do that, and now I hate my own mother too. I was starting to feel like I was sitting there with hatred for my mother. I was wondering what the hell this was all about. Are you making me feel a little ashamed? No. Usually after dinner, Uncle used to go home, but now they are halfway there. What was he doing in his mother's room at this time of night? They have been here and don't know why they are here today. Or how long has this been going on, and I am ignorant. Thinking this, I am prejudiced. I started shaking my head. I didn't understand what's happening to me. I'm sorry sometimes. It seemed like he was angry sometimes, but I wasn't. I was about to get up, and now everyone is longing to light the house on fire. I will vent my anger on someone. I was trying to figure something out, but I didn't understand. I was wondering what to do to my mother and uncle. Suddenly, my mental spirit wandered, and she started walking towards her father. Father also reached the limit. What kind of earning could you do? Don't even bother to check on your home after returning. They never heard from their wife or their child. It has been 8 to 10 years since I went to Saudi Arabia. And in that entire period, they probably did it twice. I had returned to Pakistan. But I remember even when he was in Pakistan, his behavior was very strange with my mother. My father was his own. There was a man who lived in the world drunk. They have nothing to do with this. What was going on in the world around them? I still remember it well. This kind of behavior towards mother at home. I used to ask my mother this many times. I used to wonder if there was anything between you and your father. There was a fight, replied Amma, smiling. Oh no, you fool. What are you thinking? Why are you leaving? Why did your father and I fight? Will you do it then? I wonder, my mother. Looking at the face, the question is asked again. If I did, then Mom and Dad would be with us. Why don't you sit down and tell me? They don't even call me mother. The hair on my head waves my hand, and I answer. Oh no, they are not angry with us, nor are there any fights. It just happened. That's just how he is. Such is the silent and cold behavior of father. Even my mother remained silent while watching. She avoided calling her father too much. I used to do it, and then I saw my mother. I didn't go to my father's house much either, because looking at their stern faces, I was always afraid, and in my mind, I thought maybe Dad was angry. And then I was only 5 years old when my father left for Saudi Arabia and never returned. Never heard of his wife or child. I don't know what to do with my wife here, just with her. I could neither think nor imagine ahead. I had the courage to face the events of that night. Later, I started to hate my mother. Now, when I was coming back from school, Uncle was found mostly in our house during the day. They would go and see me looking at them. I was so angry that I had to avoid this situation. So I started living outside the house. As soon as I got home from school, I put my bag on the bed. Throwing, changing clothes, and eating food, I would have gone out into the street without my mother. The voices kept on making noises. Stop eating, Farouk. Where is he going? But I am stubborn. Maybe I don't listen to a single word from you, Mom. I wanted to tease you slowly. He started doing everything that my mother used to stop me from doing. I was wandering the streets all day. I spend my time doing this and hope that the evening will fall. He would have entered the house and said, Now, Uncle, go to your house. I have had this hope many times. I used to be fulfilled at my uncle's house. I didn't get to see it, but I did it many times. My body would burn when I saw it. Uncle used to be present at our house all day. I was afraid to face my uncle at the time and lived outside the house most of the time. But now, after the incident that night, my heart had also developed a doubt as to whether they both meet at night. If Uncle also meets at night, if they are found in our own home, then my staying out of the house all day is a problem for them. Avoiding them and not talking to them is all useless because Uncle is here even at night. Or maybe it was just that day. Or maybe the days are here as much as I am about this. I was thinking. I was getting so confused. I was, and this confusion always bothered me. I was holding my uncle now, slowly. I had even stopped calling my mother and Uncle Shaquille. Both are feeling this change well. My mother would often tell me, "What is happening to you, Farouk? Stubbornness has never been like this before. Why are you bothering your mother, son?" I don't answer anything that my mother says and used to turn away in hatred, but now Uncle also started complaining. One day I was sitting alone in my room when I heard the door outside open. Then I heard my uncle's voice in the courtyard. It was me. They were making noises, but I was silent. He sat there and then walked towards me. They reached the room and entered for a while. Silently looking at me, I nodded. I sat hunched over, and then he came to me. To say while lovingly stroking my head, I felt like, "Farouk, what's the matter, son? I'm sorry that you've become very quiet, and so you don't even call me anymore. Look, I've been giving my voice for a long time, but you didn't answer even once. What's the matter? Are you angry? Do you have any grievances against me? If you have something to say, speak from the heart, son." Distances grow with love, Uncle. They were trying to explain it to me, but I ignored them. He didn't answer anything and bowed his head. Been busy doing my work. Finally, something after standing for a long time, he quietly left the room. My uncle and aunt left and loved me very much. To tell you the truth, sometimes I used to be very sorry for my behavior, but all this was beyond my control. Enough of these actions of my mother and uncle, seeing when I couldn't do anything else. So again and again, I would be stubborn and rude, and I would just stop talking to them. That was all I had in my head as time passed. And now it had been 2 years since Auntie died. But Uncle Shaquille has not remarried yet. It was while I was in front of my mother many times. I had mentioned this under pretext. That uncle should get married now, but no. I wonder what was going through their minds now. It was 15 years since my mother and uncle. That hatred against mother and uncle, the seed of hatred that has taken root in my heart. That hatred grew with the passing of time. The seed had now become a trunk and a tree. And in this resistance, I continue to spoil myself. Although I had a feeling that I want to take revenge on my mother for this. That night, I was destroying myself. Mom was begging me to eat, but I refused to eat and said I wasn't hungry. "Doctor, make him hungry," saying, "If I feel like it, I'll eat it," I said to myself. He went into the room and sat in the bed, opening his pocket. He took out a cigarette, lit it, and puffed on it. I was thinking about my father. I was thinking, why not call my father and tell them the whole situation? Tell them to return to Pakistan. Because I can't see all this. Then suddenly my mother entered my room. I raised my head and looked at them, looking at me in surprise and confusion. Then she stepped forward and slapped me in the face. He slapped me hard and took my hand. He also snatched the cigarette, and then in a stern tone, she started talking to me and said, "What is this? You know, Farouk, you're smoking a cigarette. How old are you, and how did you do this? I'm watching the movements. Day by day, you are growing beyond measure, mother. I stood up from my seat after hearing this, and looking into their eyes, saying, "It seems good that you are seeing this. I am going beyond the limit, and I am crossing the limits. How many years has it been since I asked this question?" It was late when my mother slapped me on the face again. A slap, followed by a thunderous sound. I started to say, "Silence. One more word, so I'll pull my tongue out of my mouth. I forgot who you are talking to. I'm a mother." Your mother's voice is heavy as she says this. It had definitely happened. Tears were stuck in his throat. I also had to rent a car or cross it. I had decided to do 2 things too, he replied. "Yes, I remember that. You are my mother, but maybe you forgot. You are my mother, but rather the honor of a mother. And you have forgotten the status too, oh my God." Her eyes were looking at me from shedding tears, then she started crying. I started saying in a loud voice, "What have I done? You stand in front of me like this and demand an answer from me." "Good," I said, smiling. "Wow, I'll have to tell you this too. This day, tonight, you and your uncle will be singing the songs together." The words were still in my mouth when my mother said another slap in the face. During the day, the outside door opened and Uncle entered the house. They probably went in to have dinner. Then they heard the noise. Hearing this, he came towards my room in surprise. Standing in the middle of the door, watch this scene. Then they moved forward and stood in front of me. Stood up and said in a regretful tone. I thought, what am I seeing? "Farouk, you talk to your mother in such a loud voice." They were pointing fingers at their mother's character. "While lifting you up, even for a moment I didn't feel afraid." Uncle asked me questions. I was answering, and my mother was crying at the same time. She had already left the room when her uncle held me by the shoulders and laid me on the bed. While making me sit down, they said, "Sit here and relax. Listen to me, I will tell you your mother. I tell you the whole truth, that's inside. I'm telling you something that I probably should have told you today. It's the right time." Then Uncle said, as if he were saying that Farouk was your father many years ago. "When I went to Saudi Arabia, everything was fine at first. Even though he was of a quiet nature before, the owner was his attitude towards your mother. It was in front of you all. Then you went to Saudi Arabia. 5 years later, he had a second marriage. So he never did it again. I didn't go back and ask about your mother. Your mother has been inside for so many years. Your father kept on burning. He was there, enjoying your married life with laughter and joy. What is your mother doing here? We are serving our sentence. Tried very hard to somehow resolve this issue. It should be resolved, but your father is on wings. It doesn't even let water fall. Finally, when it's 3 or 4 years have passed since the marriage, then the family elders demanded this from him. What if you lived a happy life? If you deserve it, you deserve such a life. You have a wife too, so set her free. She should also marry a second time and leave her husband. Have a good married life together, but your father proved to be very selfish. I gave your mother a divorce, but on this condition. But he will pay your expenses in this case. If she stays in the same house and she won't marry again, only then will she be yours. He will pay your expenses to your mother and take care of your grandchildren. You know the situation there. How much poverty there is, so your mother has a... Once again, let your heart and desires and buried his feelings in his heart because your father is good to you. Your mother was sending pocket money to her. Buried emotions and feelings for this reason, that while living here in this house, his son is eating his fill, right? And you? Today you pointed your finger at the character of this mother. Without thinking about when he will do it for you, She's been living alone since. And you know now that your aunt has passed away. I offered your mother that. Now let me go and marry her. I'm ready because my home stove is also cool. I need a wife too. On the other hand, your mother also needs a husband. I need support. But that's it. He is not ready to accept it. Let him explain how long has it been since then. But now he is also proud of the fact that when he is so old, if you took it out, now take out the rest in the same way. Now if I get married, what will my son say? I don't know what the world will say and such. He married me after thinking about so many things. You refused to do it, and you think that put it out of your mind, that your mother never crossed any boundaries. Very good. And there is a pure woman who has given birth to her child. Having spent my entire youth together, now when even age is afraid, then what about this age? I will cross that line after listening to Uncle's words. Tears were swimming in my eyes, and my head was spinning. I was bowed down in shame. I didn't understand even if I apologize. How can I do the same? I came out of my room in time for my mother. He went into the room and sat on the floor, grabbed my feet, and didn't let go until they didn't forgive me after that. I myself arranged the marriage of my mother and uncle. Uncle, if you have arranged it, you already know about me. But now that he has become a father, he is even more kind and compassionate. And thus, my what was missing in life was a father's love. Even Uncle had completed this video. Friends, please share your valuable feedback with us in the comment section. I will definitely let you know what I think. And if you like it, please watch more such new videos. Be sure to subscribe to this channel as well. I'll take it. Thank you.